Today I want to address the question which I have been asked many times: can a relationship survive mental illness? This is a very good question, because whenever an individual finally accepts that their spouse has a mental illness or has been diagnosed with a mental illness, the question is, should I stay or should I go? In order to answer that question, it is very important for us to understand what does it mean when we say somebody has a mental illness. Number one is that they have a mental medical condition. So we need to look at it from that space. This person has a medical condition that requires medical attention. So we cannot continue to live in the thoughts that mental illness is a moral issue. This person can control that if they wanted to. We do need to accept that when a person is diagnosed with bipolar, they are diagnosed with schizophrenia, that these individuals, they do need mental illness treatment, which is both medical and also psychosocial. And we need to stop stigmatizing those people who have that. The reason why we have so much GBV, domestic violence issues, is because there are many people who are abusers. They have mental illness that has never been diagnosed. And so they continue to repeat the same behaviors, and they are causing a lot of pain and havoc to their families, because they have either refused or there is no information to show them that this is a mental health condition that can be cured, can be managed, so that the behaviors of abuse can stop. There are other issues when it comes to mental illness, because sometimes you have somebody who has a diagnosable mental illness and they also have a personality disorder. So when you combine the two, it becomes very difficult for that person to agree to go for treatment. So for the person who has a spouse who has been diagnosed with mental illness, one of the things that you need to understand is that you've got to prioritize your own safety, number one, your self-care. Number two, please go to a therapist and allow them to psychoeducate you. You can read on your own, but you also need the voice of reason from an expert who understands mental illness, and they will be able to explain to you how to live with this person, how to manage the triggers, and how to make sure that you are very well versed with what that illness means. When you realize that your spouse has a mental illness, you need to go through a process of grief counseling, because that means that you have come into understanding that this person is not who or the way that you expected them to be. So you are going through a process of grief. I've worked with couples that when they were in love and when they were preparing to get married, one of them did not disclose, either because they don't know why or because it's a source of shame for them. Then what happens when you come into the marriage and then you realize they had that you, as the person who is having to live with your spouse with a mental illness, you're going to feel slighted, and you're going to go through a process of grief and a lot of bitterness and anger, plus the question of, so what does this mean about our children? Does that mean that my children are going to be exposed to the probability of them developing mental illness? Because we do know mental illness has a component of biology in it, where it can be passed from one generation to another. So there are so many questions that are triggered by discovering that your spouse has mental illness, and so it gets worse before it gets better. The thing that you want to do for yourself, if you are the one who has been diagnosed with a mental illness, please go through the process of acceptance, because that acceptance means that you are going to go through grief. You have many questions. Allow a counselor to walk with you. Allow a counselor to help you manage the symptoms that have been causing havoc in your marriage, in your relationships, so that you can be able to take charge of your mental illness, because you can manage it. You can thrive in your life. You can have a life of fulfillment if you are able to accept, so that you can take charge of your mental illness, where you go through pre-contemplation. You are contemplating that maybe this is my reality. Then you get into contemplation, and at this point you are motivated to be able now to create a plan, how you're going to manage your life and how you are going to be able to live through what you have just found out as far as the mental illness is concerned. The other thing that happens with being diagnosed with mental illness is suddenly you now know why you have these behaviors that you are unable to control, and now you know that now I have control. I can be able to manage so that I'm not hurting the people around me, and you begin to develop compassion and empathy for the people with you. Now, for the spouse who is in that space, seek your own help, where you go through a process of grief and get into acceptance, understand the illness so that you can support your spouse in that. Don't stay in this limbo. Should I leave? Should I stay? If I leave, I feel like I am abandoning him or her. If I stay, I feel like I can't breathe. So what should I do? What about my kids? How do we do all of this? That is a process of your family going into a space of transition so that you can get to a place where all of you are educated and you can manage the situation. What that creates is more of a relational focus on the problem instead of us looking at the problem as one person. And this message that I am saying right here, it works even when it is a child who has been diagnosed with a mental disturbance or a mental illness, that we don't see her or him as the problem in the family, but we see this as a problem that all of us can make it relational, and we seek to know how are we going to support our family member so that they can be able to manage the situation, because we don't want to abandon either by leaving them or by assuming that there is no problem, going into denial. As you all know, I am a family and marriage counselor, so I would be willing to work with your family, with your spouse, the both of you, to tackle this issue of mental illness within the family, within the relationship, and how can you survive it so that it doesn't break the relationship and it doesn't break the family. So until I see you next time, I wish you good mental health in your relationships, and also that you will continue to live by design.